I'm Frank Vaughn. It's June 16th, 2025, and yesterday was Father's Day, and I didn't put out my usual Father's Day message. I was busy being part of Father's Day and taking an extra day's rest. I'm starting to feel better. I said I would reassess on Monday morning, and I am here. It's Monday morning, and I think I'm on the mend, though it may take a while to get to 100%. You can hear my voice coming back. But just to deal with Father's Day first, men, fathers, you're important. Did you know one of the leading indicators of a good childhood outcome, a child that will have empathy, a child that will not engage in criminality, is the presence of a strong and responsible male figure in their life? Some people think empathy develops from the mother. It does not. This is one of those established facts when it comes to family dynamics. Children need their dads. And though there are bad fathers out there, aplenty, and there's bad mothers out there aplenty, setting all the individual circumstances aside, I see a tragedy that's ongoing. I've seen it happen in my life where things don't work out between the mom and the dad. And mom has all the power of the family courts on her side, and so she tries to eliminate dad from the children's lives because she doesn't like him. She tries to replace him. The dad suffers, and then 10, 20 years down the road, the children looking for answers figure it all out. So for those men in my life and those men that aren't even in my lives that are suffering from this very thing, try to keep your stick on the ice and try to keep your eye on the ball. Down the road somewhere, your children will seek you out, and you need to be there for that moment to recapture some of what you've lost. But if you're a mother who really appreciates her husband, her dad, or even your ex who is a good father, thank you for that. Your children will thank you later. But this idea that men are replaceable, that masculinity is toxic, this assault that targets men more than anybody else in society, really, it needs to end. We need to celebrate our men. We need to celebrate our fathers and our dads and the good men out there just trying. And if you happen to be in a relationship and you don't like your husband and things aren't working out, remember, the relationship between you and your spouse is separate from the relationship between the spouse and the child. And I'm not talking about instances of abuse here, but this replacement idea, this pushing out, this idea of turning men into nothing more than sperm donors. And by the way, there's going to be people who don't like my opinion on this, and that's too bad. As a father myself, luckily, in a loving marriage and in a loving relationship, in a loving family dynamic, I am presently aware that my wife holds all the cards if she wanted to use those cards. If she left me, I'm going to be the one paying for the kids. If she left me, she's going to get custody. If she left me, she's going to have all the assets of the state on her side, and I'm going to be left on my own. Her word against mine defaults to her word. I've seen it over and over again. There's people who are going to try and tell me it's not that way. It is that way. And so long as there's a situation in society where my wife, if she gets pregnant, she can decide to terminate that child without consulting me whatsoever, there is no recourse for me. But at the same time, if she decides to keep that child, I am liable financially for it for the next 18 years and beyond, because some guys are still paying support when their kids are in their 20s because they can't find anybody to stop the garnishing of their wages. This stuff is going on right here in Canada. So long as that situation prevails, you have to tolerate my opinion and the opinion of the other men in society, whether it's family relationships, whether it's abortion, whether it's any of these issues. So long as we bear that financial burden, that liability, without any recourse, we get an opinion. The dispossessed fathers in this country and the stories that they tell are heartbreaking and heartrending. So all that is to say, happy Father's Day. Whether you're a dad that's not struggling, whether you're a dad that has to work away for 2 weeks, you're gone, you don't see your kids, but on the weekends, there's so many different dynamics. But never doubt your importance. You're the bedrock. You're the foundation of your child's future emotional growth, their ability to empathize, their ability to be stable. It's not that moms don't contribute to that. They do. But the role that fathers play is diminished in our society alongside the assault on family. The entire, I talked about on Mother's Day how the institution of motherhood is under assault, that somehow literally keeping the human race alive and dedicating yourself to nurturing your children is frowned upon. You're supposed to take your children, stick them in the cheapest form of daycare possible while you go out and work to be a tax slave. And somehow that's better. Somehow that's a better way to spend your life. I think it's terrible. The assault on family has undermined the entire fabric of Western civilization. But that's getting outside of the thing I'm trying to address right now. Dads who are struggling, hold on. If you're not seeing your kids, they've been taken away from you, one day those children will seek you out. They'll be looking for answers. And that is where justice for you will come in. So keep your stick on the ice. Keep moving forward. Don't give up. Next up on the docket is an update on the Israel-Iran war. This is probably the most important story that's going around right now. And it seems every time I talk about it, I get no engagement whatsoever. I understand why. This is so hot button. Nobody wants to take an opinion on this. Nobody wants to, because you're always slotted. You're expected to take sides. So you have to come down on Israel's side, or you have to come down on Iran's side, or you have to be in a camp. You can't just try and find the answers. You can't just try and figure out what's going on. And each camp takes it as a direct assault on their being when you highlight a fact that contradicts one of their talking points. I'm getting it from both sides right now, whether it's pro-Israelis or it's there's a fella who is very concerned about the Palestinians. He attacks me almost daily now. Can't figure me out. I'm just trying to find the answers. My principal concern, in spite of the fact that I haven't been talking about it much lately, because honestly, time needs to pass by, and we'll get into that a little bit, is Canada. My primary concern is the place I live and trying to extricate myself from all of these international conflict. Did you know there's a Khalistani Republic separatist convoy going to the G7 right now to try and harass the Prime Minister of India? Why is this in Canada? Why is this happening here? Why are we importing these conflicts from overseas? That remains my principal concern as I talk about this. And why am I talking about this? This is my principal concern because the effects on geopolitics of this particular war will have repercussions for all of us, potentially enormous repercussions. So we have to keep our eyes on it. I'll get into it more tomorrow. Tomorrow is now today. But Netanyahu's government isn't in the strongest position. It was on the cusp of falling since the end of May. As damage and casualties mount, regardless of how much harder Iran is getting hit, after all the wars the Israeli people have endured, so we're talking about Lebanon, we're talking about Gaza, we're talking about Syria, we're talking about all the operations. This has been going on for a long time. Destruction like what Iran can visit on Israel is a new political pressure. The IDF, without the U.S., can only go so far in Iran. And with each missile strike on the Israeli homeland, the pool of public support for Netanyahu potentially diminishes. If Iran maintains its ability to fire ballistics daily and is saving its heaviest ordnance for later attacks, it doesn't have to win the war to sink Netanyahu. That might be their calculus and why the Khomeinis and cruise missiles haven't been used. Now, the Khomeinis, that is Iran's highest payload ballistic missile. It's about 4 times the size of the most powerful missiles they've used so far. So the Iranian strategy seems to be overwhelm the Iron Dome and defenses with older technology, older drones, older missile technology, and then send in the hypersonics and send in the big ballistics to score the hits, which is where the hits are coming from. And if that's their calculus, if they're saving their best ordnance, now I don't know, their stuff could have been blown up. The fog of war is intense, so maybe they've lost their capacity. But it would make sense from a strategic point of view to hold off your best technology and your highest powered ordnance for later in the conflict once you have tested and measured the Iron Dome. I'm not advocating for Iran here. I'm talking about strategy. I'm talking about where this battle could go, because the thing is, both sides are full of it. The Israelis are full of it. They're doing their own thing. They're doing their own Homer thing. They're talking up their defenses. They're talking up their military. They're very dominant in Iranian airspace. That seems clear, but they're talking themselves up. The Iranians are doing the exact same thing, and so we're left to sift to try and figure out what's going on. I do note that the Israelis are becoming more concerned with the citizens not sharing videos of impact sites. They do not want those videos getting out there. They're still getting out there because we live in the age of information. But the fact that they're concerned with the optics tells me that there's more damage, and we know there's more damage. The injuries are happening. Residential buildings have been hit. So anyway, let's start here. Yoaz Zitun, this is an author, Why Israel Must Give Up. The Ynet reporter, likely backed by senior officials in the IDF, explains why Israel needs to cut its losses now. Veteran Ynet reporter Yoav Zitun, and this is a mouthpiece, a known mouthpiece, as it says in the article, likely with the agreement of senior IDF leaders, published a tweet on X explaining how Israel's operational gains are limited, and it should now rush to have America secure a deal. The Israelis are desperate to get the Americans involved with their big B-52s and their bunker busters because there's certain targets in Iran that the Israeli Air Force is incapable, except over long periods of attrition and war and aerial bombardment, something the Israelis, I dare say, cannot afford to do, or would rather not do. They need those American weapons. And the idea has been floated out there. There's this rumor that Trump is talking about letting Israeli pilots pilot American jets and bombers as a way to kind of keep the Americans not directly involved. I think it's kind of ridiculous at this point. The Americans are openly defending Israel. They have shared intelligence with Israel. They are coordinating everything with Israel. The only thing they're not doing is dropping bombs. They deliberately helped deceive the Iranian regime into thinking that an Israeli attack was not coming to preserve the element of surprise on behalf of the Israeli government. I don't know how much more involved America could get. I brought this up because you see Mashhad up here? The Israelis have successfully bombed Mashhad, which means they can essentially reach everywhere in Iran. Now, they require refueling in flight to reach these targets. They could be doing the refueling themselves, but they could already be getting assistance from the U.S. Air Force. And we wouldn't know out here because, like I said before, we are just guessing. But back to the point. Last night, after deliberation, it was permitted to publish, Israel does not have the capability to destroy Iran's nuclear facilities outright. The political echelon knew this and set out with a reasonable conception, but one that the public must be aware of, a package that includes striking nuclear facilities, dismantling Iranian air defenses in a way that allows Israeli fighters jets to circle over Tehran as if they were over Jabalaya, reducing the ballistic missile threat, eliminating Iran's security leadership and a credible threat to also behead the regime leaders and ayatollahs alongside possible strikes on national infrastructure like oil reserves, which has already happened, might be sufficient. Sufficient for what? To return Iran to negotiating tables from a position of weakness that will force it to sign an agreement without expiration dates and with teeth. And if not, then at least to delay the nuclear project by several years. So, tactically speaking, if Israel is left on its own, it cannot force regime change on its own, which is why it's appealing to the Iranian people to topple the regime and saying that this is your moment, it's come. But on the flip side of that, they're also telling civilians that they must mass evacuate Tehran because Israeli bombers are coming, and there's going to be a high civilian death toll if you don't get out of the way. I'm not sure how that builds the morale for regime change. But back to Yoaz Zitun. The second option could lead to a scenario that the IDF leadership began discussing and preparing for yesterday, a long war of attrition with Iran lasting months, perhaps beyond that, dripping missiles and drones, intermittent siege of Ben Gurion airport, disruption between interference and paralysis of the economy and education system, and more. Therefore, alongside the euphoria from a powerful opening blow and the justification for the move that senior IDF officials share, a closure mechanism must be demanded the political deed, or at least demands striving toward it. Iran has always excelled in multi-generational patience. Lowering the flames and years of attrition with time stretching are a victory for it. This is true. Now, back to the opening premise was that the Netanyahu government was weak. I can't believe how many people have pushed back on this. This is only, we're talking June 6th. Israel at a crossroads. Is Netanyahu's government on the brink of collapse? This is Jerusalem Post, National Affairs. Netanyahu's current coalition, despite the colossal failure of October 7th, has already outlasted about 75% of its predecessors. There's a huge and significant portion of the Israeli population that does not view Benjamin Netanyahu as a hero. And this issue has to do with this current issue, which was threatening to bring down the government. Here it is from the article. Now, though, it's facing its most serious crisis yet, and the issue threatening to bring it down is one that has dogged Israeli politics for decades: the conscription of Haredi, ultra-Orthodox men, into the army. For years, there were two constraints in Israeli politics. Coalition crises are often overblown, and efforts to conscript the Haredim never bear fruit. This week, both assumptions were tested. So, this is before the campaign in Iran began. And the timing. So you can take the cynical view that Netanyahu launched this campaign because he wants to preserve his government. You can take that view. Maybe it's right. I'm not going to say. The other view is Netanyahu genuinely believes that this is the only opportunity for Israel, an Israeli force, to take out as many of its enemies as possible right now, because the political will to do so later will not exist. And that's why it started with the special operation in Gaza. It expanded into southern Lebanon. Then it expanded into Syria. And now Iran and Israel are trading missiles and bombs like never before. Truly historic times. But this has obviously put on pause any notions of the government falling. Now, there's been a lot of talk about whether or not China, Russia, Pakistan, or the U.S. could join the fight. I think the United States, at some point, might be likely to join the fight. I think that people should be aware to differentiate between Iran's attacks on U.S. military assets and attacks that might be conducted by militias that are funded by Iran. I think that we should be aware that the potential for false flags exists. And there is a record for this. We have the USS Liberty, which came under sustained Israeli assault. And it's a matter of historical record. I mean, they whitewashed the thing and they said it was an accident, but the fact remains that if you have a good nose and you actually look at the evidence, the Israelis knew it was an American ship, and they kept firing on it anyway. And there was loss of life, damage to property, all these things in an attempt to bring the Americans into the war with Egypt. Now, I'm not saying that in our world, with easy access to information, instantaneous communication, that such a thing would happen. The Netanyahu government is not the same as the government that existed back in the 70s. These are different circumstances. But with such a dangerous situation, everybody should be maintaining their vigilance. But back to the point. Could China, Russia, and Pakistan join the fight? Well, let's go to the regime in China's favorite mouthpiece, the South China Morning Post. Israel-Iran doesn't even factor in. You have to scroll down, and finally you get Middle East. Israel-Iran continue to trade blows as hostilities inflict deadly toll. This is neutral coverage. This isn't giving the Chinese position. And the fact that it's buried down so low means the Chinese have deprioritized it. They're not interested in getting involved. Now, things could change. If Israel decides to expand its bombing operation to knock out all kinds of Iranian energy infrastructure, that might change the Chinese position. If they decide to shut the Strait of Hormuz, if the Iranians do, or if there's a massive disruption in oil exports coming out of the Persian Gulf, that could influence the politics of the world in a different direction for sure. But at the moment, this is what they're signaling. This is what they're concerned about. It is not Iran, Israel. Russia is busy in Ukraine dealing with that war. They're advancing. They're taking over more villages. That's a fact. That's just a fact of life. But the Russians may decide to send military aid to the Iranians, but even their capacity to do that is diminished and limited. I don't see it likely right now that they get involved. The most likely third party to get involved is the United States, which, as I said before, they're already heavily involved. The only thing they're not doing is dropping bombs. And there could be multiple reasons for that. There's been suggestions that the Americans are waiting for Israel to expend its force, fully guaranteeing and neutralizing Iran's ability to defend against aerial bombardment, and then the Americans will get involved. I genuinely think that Trump just doesn't want to get directly involved. He campaigned on being a peace president and bringing the end to conflict, and instead, we're closer to conflagration than we've ever been before. I want to talk about here's this just came out. Rising Lion launched at last possible moment. Foreign minister tells Jewish community leaders, indeed, because if the government had fallen, this operation wouldn't have happened. It's interesting how Israeli internal politics dovetail with the launch of this operation. And with Israel telling civilians to mass evacuate, it looks like the casualty count's going to just keep going up, but nobody's going to tell you how many Iranians are dying because they're just Iranians, just like nobody tells you how many civilians died in Gaza because they're just Gazans. It's such a, whether you are pro-Israel or anti-Israel, I try to remain impartial. I got to be honest though. I look at the Middle East. And as I said at the beginning of the video, my principal care is what happens here in Canada and what happens here in North America. But when I look at the Middle East, I look and I see Israel is the only functioning democracy. I see that a third of the Israeli population is Arab, and they live side by side with the Israelis. That after the separation wall that went up between the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, all the suicide bombing stopped. There's no rocket barrages coming from the Arab population within Israel. It's all coming from outside. You can't find a Jewish diaspora in Gaza. You can't find a Jewish diaspora in the West Bank. There are virtually no Jews living in Iran. And I can't help but note the contrast between Israel and the other nations in the Arab world. Now, people will say, it's horrible what's going on there, and it is. War is hell. War's never been nice. Civilians die, children die, babies die. Conflict is horrible. It happens both ways. Which is why I try to focus on what is and why I try to focus on Canada and keeping out these. Canada is under the influence of Hamas and Islamic Jihad and these terrorist organizations, internationally recognized, running criminal cartels right here in Canada, doing money laundering to finance their wars abroad. The whole Khalistani issue that I highlighted earlier. We have our problems. My principal concern is kicking these problems out. If you want to bring your foreign conflicts to Canada's shores and you want to screw everything up here, we should probably just be remigrating you back to that place so that you could get more viscerally involved with the conflict you're so concerned with. We got enough problems here. Israel Prime Minister scheduled for interview on an Iranian opposition outlet. That should be interesting. Now, it's at the outset of this, it was about taking out the Iranian nuclear program, and now phase 2 begins. Israel moves to topple the Iranian regime. By the way, this website, I have no idea who runs this website. They are clearly homers for Israel. Homer just means they cheer for Israel, which is fine. But I find it's a great launching board for my own researches. It's just like reading Al Jazeera. I mean, you got to read it all. You got to read it all because you're sifting. You're trying to figure out what's actually happening. Trump affirmed strong U.S. backing for Israel amid conflict. Israel is doing very well, and we have provided with a lot of support, and they are. That is true. Iranian state media warns of largest missile attack on Israel. Iranian state media issued a warning about preparations for what it described as the largest and most intense missile attack in history targeting Israeli soil. Again, they haven't fired their best. Why that is anybody's guess. They've either been destroyed or they're saving it for when they better understand how responsive the Iron Dome is, as well as U.S. forces in taking out their stuff. They're older technology, But those hypersonics have been landing. Those videos that the Israelis are trying to stop being shared on social media and with news outlets show exactly what's happening. There's power outages. There's people panicking. There's residential towers getting hit. Israel's under fire. Now this, Iranian media, Channel 12 and 14 should evacuate their offices. Threats came after Israel struck and seriously. So anyway, the Israeli government had promised, the IDF had promised that they're going to take away the Iranian megaphone, which means they are attacking their TV stations and assets. Is a news reader a legitimate target, or is that a civilian target? I find it interesting that there was a hospital hit in Iran, and once again, it's because the Israelis didn't bomb the hospital, but they bombed a target nearby the hospital, so it doesn't really count as damage to a civilian structure. I mean, these kinds of weird pretexts and justifications, I think we should all just agree that there's going to be a lot of civilian casualties on both sides of the equation if this goes on for a long time, in particular if the Iranians maintain their ability to fire ballistic missiles at Israel after all of the bombing campaigns. This is a small scene from the IRGC media station after the IDF strikes. Live on air, and they get bombed. I mean, it's just, it goes both ways. On and on. That actually brings up another point. Qatari F-15 QA fighter jets spotted over Iranian airspace with transponder turned off. Qatar is known to harbor Hamas and harbor the enemies of Israel. You have to wonder at some point, it's hard for me to imagine a direct Israeli operation on Qatar, but I wouldn't personally eliminate it as a possibility. I mean, if they're off to bomb in Iran, you look at the war that's going on right now. If Israel had an opportunity to take out a large portion of its enemies, who may happen to be gathered together in a meeting in Qatar, and they can drop one bomb and take them all out, do you think at this point, with the way that Israel is operating with abandon in several sovereign territories and nations, that they would think twice about doing it at this moment, at this juncture, at this historic moment in time? I don't believe so. I think to sum it up for today, essentially the situation, I think, is much more fluid than either side would have you believe. I think the Israeli dominance of an air superiority, I think that's very much a fact, but I also think there's cracks within the IDF and within the government. The more damage that the homeland of Israel suffers at the hands of Iranian missiles, the more pressure there's going to be to wind this thing up. If they get into a prolonged war of attrition where they can't successfully... Iran's a huge country. Even though, as I showed earlier, Israel's ability to reach every single square inch of Iran appears assured, especially if the Americans get involved, there's reason to believe that they can't successfully neutralize all of Iran's ballistic missile capabilities. And as time goes by, and as Iran demonstrates that they can foil the Iron Dome and foil David's sling, these countermeasures, and cause damage to Israel, it doesn't... There's this... I read this headline, too, that bothered me. It said, Iran hasn't successfully hit a single Israeli military target. They hit IDF headquarters, or a headquarters. I don't know if it was the headquarters in downtown Tel Aviv, so I don't know how that headline even exists. It was in I think the opening 24 hours of the war that happened. But it doesn't matter where they hit, because every single missile strike, every residential tower, and videos of that falling down in the chaos and the rubble is another blow to an already weakened domestic support base for the ongoing war efforts of the government of Netanyahu. So if I'm Iran, that's my calculation. You just have to collapse the government and maybe the regime can survive. And so maybe that's why they're holding off on their best ordnance right now, because they want to do more damage when it's going to be more impactful. That's the calculus. I'm not advocating for them or anything of that nature. Now, there's also the G7 going on. There's no surprises there, and maybe I'll get into it tomorrow, but I mean, Carney is laying out the red carpet for Donald Trump. There's all this talk in our media of the trade war and the tariff war and all this nonsense. None of it's happening. Carney's going to capitulate to Donald Trump. The very thing that the liberal base voted for him to stop Pierre Poilievre from doing is what he's doing. So nothing's changed on that front. But we will get back to talking about that probably tomorrow or later today. You may have noticed I cut my hair. Don't read into it too much. I was just sick of having long hair. It's as simple as that. There's no midlife crisis here. There's no big game plan. I kind of like it. I mean, the last few days I've been laying around a lot in bed because I've been sick, trying to get my breathing in order, and I've been very fatigued because I'm not getting enough oxygen. So I've been laying around a lot. Man, having long hair and having a ponytail, the back of your head, it gets really annoying. So I just wanted to feel the freedom of short hair again, and I'm telling you, I like it. I'm Frank Vaughn. I'll see you in the next one.